Okay, honey, get comfortable. I've got a story for you that's going to make your hair stand on end. You won't believe what happened yesterday. A client of mine, a sweet woman named Linda, came in for her usual perm. She's a regular, always so calm, you know? The kind of person who brings you cookies at Christmas. But yesterday, when she sat in my chair, her hands were trembling. Her usual soft smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. I could tell something was terribly wrong. I was just about to ask her if everything was okay when she looked at me, her eyes welling up with tears, and just blurted it out. "You won't believe what my daughter-in-law did to me yesterday," she said, her voice a low, shaky whisper. I stopped what I was doing and looked at her in the mirror. She was an older woman, maybe in her late 60s, with a kind face and a gentle spirit. It was hard to imagine anyone ever raising their voice to her, let alone what she was about to tell me. I put down the comb and just listened. She took a deep breath, like she was steeling herself for a difficult story. "You know my son, Mark, right? He's always been my rock. A good boy. He married a girl named Jessica about 5 years ago. At first, she seemed so sweet, so charming. She'd call me Mom, she'd bring me flowers, she'd praise my cooking. I thought I had hit the jackpot with a daughter-in-law. I was so happy for them. They lived in an apartment for a few years, but Mark always talked about how he wanted a place of his own. A home for their future kids, so my husband and I decided to help them out. We had a little money saved up, and we helped them with the down payment on a house just a few blocks from here. It was a beautiful place, and they were so excited. For a while, everything was perfect. I was just getting started on her hair, my hands moving almost on autopilot as I processed what she was saying. My mind went back to all those times she'd come in and told me about her grandkids, how her son was a wonderful father, how her daughter-in-law was the best thing that ever happened to him. I couldn't wrap my head around what had changed, Linda continued, her voice gaining a little more strength as she spoke. But then, about a year ago, things started to change. Jessica got a new job, a high-paying one, and her whole attitude shifted. She started talking about how she was the one paying for everything, how Mark's salary was just a bonus. She began to treat him differently, more like a roommate than a husband. She'd roll her eyes at him, interrupt him, and talk to me on the phone like he wasn't even in the room. And then, she started doing the same thing to me. It was little things at first. She'd scoff when I offered to help with their garden, or she'd forget to invite me to their Sunday dinners. I just thought she was stressed with her new job, so I let it slide. One day, she called me and said she was having an issue with her house keys and asked if I could give her a spare set. I told her I didn't have one, but that my husband probably did since he helps them out with little repairs around the house. She said she'd call him. A few days later, my husband comes home and tells me he found a key to their house that he didn't remember giving her. I just thought, well, that's odd, but I didn't think anything of it. I told Linda I had a spare set of keys to her house, but she said she'd just have them made herself. I told her I could give them to her, but she insisted. And then the other shoe dropped. A few weeks later, my husband and I went to their house for dinner, and she had changed the locks. When I asked her why, she just said, "I don't want people just showing up unannounced." It was so strange. I was so engrossed in her story that I didn't even notice I was holding the curling iron too high. My jaw was literally on the floor. I couldn't believe it. I've heard about manipulative people, but this was a whole new level of crazy. It was like she was trying to cut them out of their own son's life. I just looked at her, and she had tears streaming down her face. She just shook her head and said, "You have no idea." "Okay, take a deep breath, honey. What I just told you, that was just the prologue. The real story, the one that's going to make your jaw ache from dropping, is what happened next." Linda took another deep, shaky breath, and the tears started to flow freely now, leaving clean trails through her makeup. "That was just the beginning of the end," she continued, her voice so raw it barely sounded like her own. After she changed the locks on their house, she started to get bolder. She'd call me and ask to borrow things. First, it was my stand mixer, which she never returned. Then, it was my good set of china. She always had an excuse. "Oh, we're having a party and I don't have enough." It was like she was slowly dismantling my home, piece by piece, right under my nose. And I didn't say anything because I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law. I was just starting to put the rollers in her hair, but my hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the first one. I just kept my eyes on her reflection, trying to process this slow-motion invasion. It was a kind of psychological warfare, and it was so clever and insidious. I was honestly impressed by how awful it was. Then, her comments about my own house started. Linda went on. She'd visit and look around with this calculating gaze. She'd say things like, "You know, Mom, this place is just too big for you and Dad now that all the kids are gone. It's a lot to maintain, isn't it?" And she'd say it with this fake concern, like she was doing me a favor by pointing it out. She'd talk about how they were so cramped in their house, the house we helped them buy, mind you, and how much potential my home had for a young family. It was all a build-up to what happened last week. My hands froze midair. I knew this was coming. This was the moment of truth. My stomach was in knots. "She showed up at my front door without a phone call," Linda said, her voice dropping to a low, painful whisper. I was in the middle of doing the dishes, and I opened the door, and she just barged in, went right into my living room and started pointing at things. "This couch," she said, "would look so much better in our sunroom." And she said it so casually, like she was already making plans for my furniture. I just stood there speechless, and then she said something that made my blood run cold. She turned to me, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You know, Mom, it would be a lot easier if you just gave me a spare set of your house keys. That way, when we need something, we don't have to bother you." I almost dropped the bottle of developer onto the floor. I swear my heart stopped for a second. The audacity of this woman. I just stood there, my mouth hanging open, waiting for what happened next. And for the first time in 5 years, I finally snapped, Linda said, her voice cracking. I looked at her and said, "Jessica, this is my house. You're not getting my keys, and you are not taking my couch." And that's when it happened. Her face completely changed. All the sweetness, all the charm, just vanished. Her eyes got cold and she looked at me with this pure fury. "You are going to give me those keys," she said, her voice like ice. "You and Mark are getting old. You need to simplify. This house is too much for you. It's what's best for everyone." And when I said no again, she hit me. She raised her hand and slapped me across the face. I gasped so loud I probably startled the other client getting her nails done. I put everything down. I just couldn't continue. I couldn't believe it. A slap, a physical assault, in a woman's own home by her own son's wife? My mind was racing. How could anyone be so cruel? I sat there, frozen, the perm rod still in my hand. I couldn't breathe. The story had gone from manipulative to outright horrifying. I looked at Linda, and I could see the pain. Not just from the slap, but from the realization that her son's wife, the woman she had welcomed with open arms, was capable of such cruelty. What did you do?" I whispered, barely able to get the words out. Linda looked at me, her eyes clouded with a mix of shock and resolve. I just stood there. I was in so much shock I couldn't even speak. And she just stood there, staring at me, like she was waiting for me to break. But then I looked at her and I finally saw her for who she really was, a bully. And in that moment, I found my voice. I took a deep breath and I said, "You can take whatever you want from this house, but you will never take my dignity. And you will never set foot in my home again." And I slammed the door in her face. My heart swelled with a mix of relief and pride for her. She'd been so passive for so long, and in her darkest moment, she found the strength to fight back. But that wasn't the end of it. Not even close. She had to tell her son. This was the part I was most nervous about. "I waited for about an hour," she continued, her voice now firm and steady. My face was stinging, and I just kept thinking, my son has to know. So I called Mark. I told him what happened. He didn't believe me at first. He kept saying, "Mom, you must be mistaken. Jessica would never do that." But I told him to look at my security camera footage. I have a little one by the door, and I told him to look at it. I was on the edge of my seat. I imagined the scene in my mind. Mark sitting at his computer, pulling up the footage, and his entire world crashing down. The wife he loved, the mother of his children, caught in the act. "He came over 20 minutes later," Linda said, her voice now a mix of heartbreak and pride. "He walked in and he just looked at me. He saw the red mark on my cheek. He didn't say a word. He just hugged me, and he held me for what felt like an eternity. He told me he was so sorry. He said he had no idea she was capable of something like that. He said he was blind to it. I had to wipe away a tear. The bond between a mother and her son is something sacred. He went home, and he confronted her. Linda finished. She denied it, of course. She said I was lying, but he showed her the footage. He gave her an ultimatum. She had to apologize to me, and she had to admit what she did, or he would leave. She refused. She said I deserved it, and Mark, my sweet boy, he packed a bag and left. He's staying with a friend for a while. He told me he's going to get a lawyer and file for divorce. He said he can't be with a woman who would ever do that to his mother. And there it was. The resolution. It wasn't a happy ending, not really. It was messy, painful, and it meant a family was breaking apart. But in a way it was a victory. Linda had lost a daughter-in-law, but she had saved herself and her relationship with her son. When I was done with her hair, her face looked softer, more at peace. The physical mark of the slap was gone, but the scar on her heart would take a long time to heal. And as I swept up the hair from the floor, I thought about all the stories I've heard in this salon. We're not just here to do hair. We're here to listen. We're here to be a witness to a person's truth, to hold their pain and their secrets. Because behind every beautiful hairstyle, there's a story you'd never believe. So, tell me, what would you have done in her place?